Welcome back to another episode of Pragmatic Optimists. Today we're going to be talking about Delaney Hall, protests, legal recourse, and immigration broadly. I'm Rachel Cohen. I'm joined by Rhode Island State Senator Tiara Mack here on Legal AF on the Midas Touch Network. Make sure to like, subscribe, follow along, and let's get into it. At Delaney Hall, there have been so many, which is a large immigration facility in Newark, New Jersey, where Mayor Ras Baraka was arrested, where LaMonica McIver was arrested and continues to face charges. At this facility, there are many, many people inside who are currently on hunger and labor strike over terrible conditions on the inside. Lack of access to counsel, lack of access to medical care, lack of access to appropriate food, worms in food, all of these terrible things. There are additional protests that are occurring outside of Delaney Hall that have occasionally escalated to a point where the state police have been arresting dozens of protesters, where ICE officials and other federal agents have been targeting people with chemical weapons, while people are outside to uplift and amplify the hunger strikers on the inside. And I want to talk about, I think, two things. Number one, Tiara, and I'll kick this back to you in 1 second. I just want you kind of percolating and thinking about patterns that we've seen with particularly centrist Democratic governors, but Democratic governors across the board when it comes to protest on behalf of people who are getting disappeared to concentration camps. And second, I want to talk about legal recourse here because the state of New Jersey filed against GEO Group, the private prison company that runs Delaney Hall, and I think like 70% of ICE facilities across the country, because they are not allowing New Jersey access to the full facility to perform state mandated health inspections. The city of Newark, again, led by Mayor Ras Baraka, has already been really focused on these types of legal challenges, and now the state is joining them. And I want to draw our attention there, not because I have any major takeaways, but because I think that I will have major takeaways down the line, because the state of California, where there are also people on hunger strike in the Adelanto facility, recently passed the Masumakan Justice Act in the state Senate, which strengthens state level oversight of kind of health and safety in these facilities. That was named after Masumakan, who we actually had on Legal AF on Prague a while ago, who is a 64, she may be 65 years old now, woman who's lived in the United States for decades, peacefully on a pathway to legal status or litigating her pathway to legal status, who was detained without access to medication, without warm clothes. And so state of California just passed this oversight bill. I think it's one of the important pathways to state level oversight of these detention facilities. They've passed that. I think that how the courts go in this New Jersey suit, because GEO is saying, we can't let you in to look at everything until we get consent from ICE. It becomes this huge question of like state level police power to regulate, because it's based on the grounds that the state gets to regulate and inspect these kinds of facilities, which of course they do. I think that's going to wind its way up through various court levels. I think that's going to have massive implications down the line for the kind of oversight that states are able to engage in when it comes to these concentration camps. So all of that being said, and I think this is a common pattern on this show, I'm thinking, okay, well, if the courts say that the state doesn't get to come in and inspect the concentration camps, kind of feels like our only pathway is direct action, confrontational protest. Tiara, what do you think about the response from various state level officials to protesters outside of Delaney Hall and outside of ICE concentration camps broadly?
Well, Rachel, the first thing that comes to my mind is that I think everywhere should have a First Amendment camp now, because apparently the only place that you can practice your First Amendment is inside a little quarter outside of Delaney. There are just so many things that are wrong with what's happening, and the line has been crossed. The line for taking seriously the work of these inhumane facilities and the US's complicity. Your tax dollars are being used to detain people in concentration camps inside of our own country. And your first,
not my tax dollars.
Well, not yours.
Famously not paying them.
another episode. But the other piece is that there are other individuals who will just normalize not holding systems accountable for the absolutely terrible treatment. And to be clear, Rachel, all of the things that we're hearing happening in Delaney also are happening in prisons across the United States, where we are housing mostly Black and brown individuals, men who I believe it was, and oh my God, we should do an episode on this, but I believe just a few days ago, there was in Louisiana a court case that the judge said, I actually cannot say that you guys are being held in prison as indentured servants, and that you are basically working slave wages for making less than 20 cents a day in some cases because of a new court case that came out. So there are the conditions that we are seeing in Delaney are not new by any chance. They are even more horrible because they are happening with an even more vulnerable and oppressed group of people in our country. But to be clear, this is how American prison systems have always worked. When prisoners have gone on strike, when they have highlighted they are making less than $1 a day in some cases to make products and goods for corporate America, we know exactly where that exploitation comes from. It stems from our country's almost 250-year history of being a nation built on the exploited labor of other people. And the inhumane conditions that we justify, whether it is the concentration camps that are happening now at Delaney, or whether it is the ones that were happening at Alligator Alcatraz or any of these other facilities, this is who we always have been. This is who these companies who have gotten billions of dollars of federal funding in order to host these camps were doing before they got billions of dollars to open up more concentration camps. And so it's really frustrating when people are like, I can't believe this is happening. It's always been happening. It's been happening right in front of our faces. People have been protesting. People have been calling attention to it. There's multiple documentaries about the abhorrent treatment, especially in American prisons. And that it's really frustrating to now have to watch Americans say, but what do we do now? It's the same thing that organizers throughout the Deep South have been doing. They have been organizing. They have been going to these communities, and legislators as well. There are very few legislators that can, especially at the federal level, who can say that they don't know what is happening. There have been report after report after report. The conditions at other GEO facilities, the conditions at other core civic facilities have been highlighted numerous times through numerous reports that most likely are sitting in their email boxes or in or on a shelf. But that doesn't make the horrors any less any less real or any less urgent for us to call attention to. But as we go into the midterms, I hope that people take it seriously that who we elect matters. There is a new governor in New Jersey. And Rachel, I'm curious to know, how do you think the new governor of New Jersey is handling the Delaney situation, or the mayor as well is handling the situation of Delaney? We saw what happened in Minnesota. We saw that in Chicago, they had pretty great anti-Trump elected officials who at every level were standing with protesters for the most part, and who were like calling out some of the abhorrent behaviors. But how are the leaders in New Jersey responding? As someone who was on the ground in New Jersey for one day, but also as someone who saw Chicago and what y'all went through.
Yeah, I was definitely much more on the ground in Chicago, secondarily in Minneapolis. I did make it out to Delaney for a day because I happened to be in New York, but there are really incredible people that are doing like longitudinal on the ground work there. I'm definitely not one of them. To your question, I think the response that we've seen in New Jersey is actually really comparable to the response that we've seen in Chicago from elected officials, where generally the mayor's office is behaving a little bit imperfectly. Like, people are in binds as elected officials, but is coming out like full-throatedly in support. I think Ras Baraka has been like on the front lines of this since the earliest days. He tried to gain access to Delaney Hall last year in the oversight visit that led to the charging of Representative LaMonica McIver for bullshit, for like showing up to exercise her congressional oversight responsibilities. And I think that we're seeing from governors nothing. Like, we're seeing actively harmful behavior from governors who are worried that Donald Trump is going to nationalize or federalize, the National Guard in their states. They're worried about like confrontational protests. They're like, oh, we don't want to give ICE a reason, as people inside are risking their lives because the conditions on the inside of these facilities are so deadly and abhorrent. I give ICE a reason, like they need a reason, right? And so we saw the deployment of state troopers to brutalize protesters, to arrest protesters, both in Chicago and in New Jersey. In the city of Chicago, there are still dozens of people who are facing state level charges brought by the Cook County state's attorney against them for protest, for exercising their First Amendment rights. We saw the creation of these First Amendment zones in Chicago. We've seen them again in New Jersey that then are an excuse for police to brutalize protesters and to say, oh, you're exercising your First Amendment rights in the wrong place, which I will say, just as an attorney, is a real thing that the government can do. They can limit like time, place, manner restrictions for your First Amendment rights. But I think that all of this goes back to your underlying point, which is that this is how things are. And one of the reasons why the Democratic Party's messaging is, in my opinion, missing a lot of the time is that until we acknowledge that this kind of treatment is condemnable, is horrible, and is happening ongoing under both Democratic and Republican presidents, not just in ICE detention, but also to people who are detained in prisons and jails across the country, we are not going to be able to get to any of the root cause issues, nor are we going to get to full-throated support, because I think that one of the reasons why plenty of people are not providing full-throated support is that they look and they're like, oh my gosh, now, then what happens when people turn their attention to private prisons that are detaining people who are involved in the criminal legal system? Then what happens when people turn their attention to public facilities? Miriam Kaba, Chicago-based or formerly Chicago-based organizer, has been talking about this extensively. Jess Pishko, who is an incredible author who writes about like sheriff's departments, have been saying that the focus on like privatization only is not great because the conditions are not really any better at government-run facilities, and we need to be tackling all of this head on. So that's a meandering, but I think ultimately I really stand by that answer, is that at the higher up you go in the Democratic Party, I think, and I mean they're like mayor to governor to people who are in leadership federally, people are really unwilling to engage deeply with the horrors here, because then they would have to admit that people have been protesting these horrors under Democratic and Republican administrations, and that they pervade not just the immigration system, not just the immigration system under Trump, but the broader American system of incarceration. And that is something that we're always going to be talking about here and centering on Pragmatic Optimists on Legal AF. And you can tell I am wrapping us out. So what's keeping me optimistic is that there is still so many people on the ground at Delaney Hall. I am impressed by the kind of Newark City leadership's response to this, to the extent that I have been following. And we're going to keep talking about it. So make sure you like, subscribe, and are following along, and we'll see you soon.
Bye, Praggies.
Bye, y'all.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.